morning, everybody. I think we're ready to begin today's event. My name is Sheila Power, for those who don't know me, and I'm currently as chair of ICLO-NLS. I would like to welcome you all here today, particularly those in person and to those who are online. We've quite a number online today. Before we begin, I would like to mention just some forthcoming events for ICLO. Next weekend, we welcome Fabian van Wax to ICLO. He is a psychoanalyst, member of the ECF and the WAP. He's a senior lecturer at the Department of Psychoanalysis of the University of Paris 8. And he will speak next Friday night at the Trust Seminar Room in the Arts Building in Trinity on Foucault's on Pleasure at 7 p.m. And on Saturday next at 10:30 a.m., he will speak to the theme of unloving, a version of the sexual non-relation, ? Both of these are tied in with the theme of the next NLS Congress, titled Painful Loves. I also would like to let you know that ICLO has a youth initiative, and anyone new to psychoanalysis are very welcome to this initiative. The youth event will be held on the 30th of November next. Registration for next weekend's event can be at registration@iclo-nls.org. We have quite a number of newcomers here today, some who are both new to ICLO and new to the NLS, or new to psychoanalysis. And just to say that the psychoanalytic discourse can be difficult to understand and follow on occasions, and indeed for us also it can be very difficult to understand and follow. I encourage those who are new to please contact us if you have any questions or queries after the event, or even indeed to make contact with Alan, Tom in relation to Cartels. But that's all I have to say for the moment. Only to add that we have a bookshop here for those present today with psychoanalytic notebooks, issue number 40 and 41, which both will speak to the theme of next weekend's Congress. Okay, thank you all, and I will pass you over now to Tom Ryan.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tom Ryan, member of ICLO-NLS, and one of the two people responsible for Cartels in ICLO this year, along with my colleague Alan Rowan. Later, we will be discussing Patricia Boscan-Carraz's paper Painful Loves, and getting perhaps a taste of how a cartel might work this piece. But first, we're going to ask Alan Rowan to say a few introductory remarks on Cartels. Over to you, Alan.
Will I sit there? Yeah. Okay. Welcome everybody to ICLO's Launching Cartels Day, which is an annual event that firstly emphasizes the importance of cartel work within the Lacanian orientation, and thus within all the schools of the World Association of Psychoanalysis, and secondly acts as an invitation to those attending today to form and partake in cartel work. In line with this, it is important to revisit the place and significance Lacan gave to cartels, when, in 1964, he founded his own school under the title École Française de Psychoanalyse, shortly afterwards renamed as the École Freudienne de Paris. 1964 is the year in which Lacan would deliver his 11th seminar entitled The Four Fundamental Concepts of Psychoanalysis, and there was a lot going on within the French psychoanalytic scene at this time. Very briefly, Lacan had, in 1938, become a member of the Parisian Psychoanalytic Society, the SPP, and thus a member of the IPA. However, in 1953, this group split, whereby a group of analysts, including Daniel Lagache and Lacan, set up a rival society, the SFP, as they were against the direction the SPP was taking under the leadership of Sacha Nacht, who incidentally saw psychoanalysis as fundamentally a medical discipline. Of course, these analysts now found themselves outside of the IPA and for 10 years sought recognition for their group by the IPA. In 1963, the IPA agrees to recognize the SFP as a study group of the IPA, but on condition that both Lacan and François Dolto are no longer recognized as training analysts within the SFP. Obviously, Lacan and many analysts of the SFP found this condition totally unacceptable, and in a sense, Lacan had no other choice after what he termed his excommunication from the IPA, but to set up his own school. It should be noted here that for many years prior to this, Lacan had been highly critical of the direction psychoanalysis had been taking under the influence of the post-Freudians, most notably in his critique of so-called ego psychology, which promoted the idea that analysis aims at establishing within the subject a strong, adaptive to reality ego. However, his critique was also wide-ranging, as one can read in his article. It's in the ECRI, The Situation of Psychoanalysis and the Training of Psychoanalysts in 1956, meaning he was also critical of the way psychoanalytic institutions functioned, seeing them as overly hierarchical, as fostering identifications, and as institutions that stifled critical debate and innovation. In other words, it is in this context that one needs to read the founding act of 1964, the establishment by Lacan of a school, wherein Lacan not only privileges the cartel, but also does away with the idea that there are training analysts and non-training analysts. As he puts it, an analysand must be free to choose his or her analyst. Moreover, Lacan wishes to see the institution he now founds as being open to working with other and various disciplines in the name of psychoanalysis. So you don't need to be a clinician or in formation as an analyst to be in a cartel, and some cartels will actively benefit from having somebody present whose expertise in another field, say one like topology, for example. In now turning to describe what a cartel is and how it functions, I can do no better than quote Lacan himself, while noting that in visiting Britain in 1945 and meeting with Bion, Wilfred Bion, Lacan had been very impressed with Bion's work on groups, and in particular, the value of working in groups where there is no, as such, leader directing the group. I quote now from Lacan's founding act. For the execution of the work, we shall adopt the principle of an elaboration sustained in a small group. Each of them will be composed of at least 3 individuals, 5 at most, 4 being the proper measure. +1 charged with the selection, discussion, and the outcome to be accorded to the efforts of each. After a certain period of functioning, the elements of the group will be invited to shift to a different group. The task of directing will not constitute a form of leadership whose service rendered might be capitalized into access to a higher rank, and no one will be inclined to regard himself demoted for entering at a rank of base level work. For the reason that every personal endeavor will place its author in conditions of criticism and supervision to which every work pursued will be subject in the école. This in no way implies an inverted hierarchy, but a circular organization whose easy to program functioning will take on consistency with experience. End quote. Let me now draw out 5 implications from this quotation as follows. 1. A cartel is clearly anti-hierarchical, and members of a cartel freely choose each other, choose what they want to work on, and also freely choose their plus one, who, as Miller puts it, must function as a poor leader. 2. The transference that operates in a cartel is a transference to work, meaning each person works in their own name. Indeed, if the cartel as a whole has a theme, say the reading of a particular seminar, each member of the cartel at the point of registering the cartel is asked to declare what trait or theme brought them to want to work in the cartel they have chosen to become a part of. 3. What is important in a cartel is not some form of collective work, some form of group product, but rather what for each member is modified or develops in relation to psychoanalytic knowledge. 4. The work of cartel members aims at producing a result. For example, a cartel member might present something on the trait or theme they were interested in working on at, say, a cartel study day. And ICLO will host a cartel study day towards the end of this academic year. Or alternatively, one might publish something in the cartel newsletter of the NLS, which comes out online more or less twice a year. 5. Cartels are temporary. As Lacan in 1980 put it, I quote, "To prevent the glue effect, there must be permutation at the end, at 1 year, maximum 2, end quote. Since Lacan, there has been one innovation around cartels, namely the invention of so-called flash cartels. These are short-term cartels which meet maybe only 5, 6, 7 times and usually work on the theme of an upcoming conference by reading texts related to the conference theme. In my view, this is a fantastic way to prepare for attending a conference, a way in which one can actively engage with the conference rather than simply turn up and, in a sense, passively consume what is on offer. In a few minutes, you will see a version of this in action as Ross, Miles, and Mercedes have agreed to read the argument for the next NLS conference entitled Painful Loves, to be held in Paris next year, and to discuss today how this reading has impacted on them, where it has led them, what has particularly resonated for each in reading the text, and/or what questions it has led to, etc. Of course, none of them has any idea what the others will bring or speak about. And Tom here on my left will be functioning as a +1 or poor leader during this discussion, which will then open onto a wider discussion with everyone who is in attendance today. By way of making a few introductory remarks on this theme of painful love, to be shortly discussed by our cartel in action, and which mostly contains references to Lacan, I thought I could say a few words on Freud's views on love. Broadly speaking, Freud's limited writings on this topic have a rather pessimistic tone in terms of the struggle the subject experiences to manage between the sexual or erotic drive and the demands of civilization, which inevitably impose prohibitions, ideals, rituals, and conventions on love and human sexuality. For example, Freud made a distinction between the affectionate and erotic currents in love, arguing that the attempt to unite these currents often presents the subject with difficulty. He expressed this with the phrase, I quote, "Where they love, they do not desire, and where they desire, they cannot love," which in various guises was, he claimed, a problem that was particularly acute for men, leading to a tendency towards what he termed, I quote, "a psychical debasement of the sexual object." However, he also stated that women were not immune from difficulties in this sphere, whereby a splitting occurs in relation to the love object that inhibits erotic life. A second problem that Freud pointed to was the persistence of the infantile in love, meaning that the first other-directed love objects, the parental ones, both consciously and unconsciously, continue to exert a presence within adult love life. Simply put, one brings expectations into the love relation. One wants unconsciously to be loved in this or that particular way. And moreover, one is inevitably attracted consciously, but also unconsciously, to some particular trait or series of traits in a partner. I can give a simple example. A man in analysis speaks of the three loves of his life and describes three seemingly very different women, but then comes to see that they all had a particular trait. Here we can see how repetition leads to a form of reduction or formalization within analysis that allows this subject some access to what Freud termed his, I quote, conditions of love. Just give me 1 sec. A few further remarks now based on Freud's paper on narcissism, 1914, where he talks of types of object choice in men and women. However, one needs to note here that there is nothing absolute in Freud concerning this difference, the difference between men and women. For as he states, I quote, "We may assume that both types of object choice are open to each individual, though he or she may show a preference for one or the other," end quote. While in his paper Negation from 1925, he states, I quote, "All human individuals, as a result of their bisexual disposition, combine in themselves both masculine and feminine characteristics, so that pure masculinity and femininity remain theoretical constructions of uncertain content," end quote. That said, Freud outlines two main types of object choice, which he termed the analytic and the narcissistic type, arguing that the former governs object choice more for men, the latter more for women. In a way, he is trying to answer the question of how love gets going. For obviously, one cannot just sit down and decide to love someone. On the analytic axis, Freud listed 4 conditions for love operative in many men as follows. 1, the need for there to be present in reality or in fantasy a rival for the love object, meaning some men need to feel that they have not just wooed their love partner, but have in some sense competed for her or won her. 2, the need for some men, in order to love, to debase their love object, to reduce the other, again, sometimes in reality, but mostly in fantasy, to some form of prostitute-like sex object. 3, in contrast to the former condition, the need for some men to idealize the other in the sense of seeing the other as the essence of purity and sexual integrity. 4, the need in some men to feel that in love they are rescuing the other, saving them, giving them a better life, etc., than they would otherwise have. Of course, what Freud is referring to here are the leftover traces from the child's negotiation of the Oedipus complex that may be more or less present for a particular subject and are usually unconscious, or at least not recognized consciously by a subject. He implies also that for some subjects, there is a greater distance from such Oedipal traces, even if they're never absent. The idea, therefore, that such Oedipal traces may have a more limited impact when it comes to choosing a love object for some subjects. When he comes to discuss the so-called narcissistic type of object choice, things are somewhat more complicated. For if Freud argues that this form of love choice is more common in women, he also claims that all love is essentially narcissistic, meaning that when one loves, one is driven unconsciously by the wish to be loved. In terms of women, for example, he states that it is usually much more important for a woman to be loved by the other as against loving the other. He lists 4 ways in which a narcissistic object choice might manifest itself as follows. 1, I love the other because they are like me, which may involve not seeing or putting to one side their difference to me. 2, I love the other because unconsciously I see in the other something resembling how I once was or ideally saw myself, for example, as innocent, kind, caring, etc. 3, I love the other because they represent how I would like to be, an image I aspire to make manifest in myself. 4, I love the other because in them I find a trait that allows me to have access to what was once a part of me or present to me, meaning usually a choice made on the model of a parental figure. For example, the somewhat comic but also real idea for Freud, something that clinically emerges, that we see in the clinic, when, say, for example, a man in this case might discover that what he most loves, and of course hates, in another is what in this other is mother to him. In now finishing, I would like to make 2 further points. In On Narcissism, Freud makes the point that infatuation with the other, something that can occur, especially in the early phases of a love relation, occurs when we over-idealize the other, effectively distorting them, meaning that this is necessarily a temporary thing. Underlying this is a massive transfer of libido from the subject's ego to the loved object, meaning that the ego, one's own image, for example, is now or temporarily less invested in, or indeed, one could say here, is depleted of energy. Freud argues that remaining in such a state is likely to lead to psychological difficulties for the subject. And then he adds, I quote, "In the last analysis, we must begin to love in order not to fall ill. And we are bound to fall ill if in consequence of frustration, we are unable to love," end quote. Put simply, what Freud is here emphasizing is that in order to remain well, every subject must find a balance between what we can call here, somewhat simplistically, self-love and love for another, even if this love for another may not necessarily be another person, meaning it could be a cause that is passionately invested in, or say, a love of God, etc. So we could say here that sustaining love entails managing well this balancing act. Last point. In Instincts and Their Vicissitudes, 1915, Freud states the following, I quote, "The change of the content of an instinct, we would say drive, into its opposite is observed in a single instance only, the transformation of love into hate. Since it is particularly common to find both these directed simultaneously towards the same object, their coexistence furnishes the most important example of ambivalence of feeling," end quote. And then a little later on the same page, he adds, I quote again, "Loving and hating, taken together, as they should be, are the opposite of the condition of unconcern or indifference." So, for Freud, there is no love without hate, or to use the kinder term, the experience of ambivalence towards the other. And moreover, hate is not the opposite of love, rather, indifference is. Once again, we see that loving another presents a subject with the pretty complex psychological task of managing this ambivalence if love is to be sustained. Of course, here we need to distinguish the hate connected to love that Freud has I just quoted, and hatred as an expression of the death drive, meaning the wish to destroy the other or to instrumentally use violence to control and humiliate the other, etc. In conclusion, then, I think we can say that Freud presents us with a rather sobering view of what love is. For example, and as just mentioned, if love can be experienced as blissful, as something that leads to a deep sense of happiness, well, it will invariably also have elements or moments of hate within it. Moreover, to maintain love involves for Freud managing a whole range of complex psychological phenomena, most notably the traces of how we were both loved and hurt within our original love relations. On this view, I think it is fair to say that for Freud, love is an achievement. It is something we create, something we must maintain and cultivate, something that privileges, one might say, the two over the one, even when things are difficult. Perhaps the key question a subject must deal with in love is not, do I love him or her, or does he or she love me, but rather a slightly more complex and challenging question, as in, am I being and do I desire to be lovable to this particular other? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan, for that wonderful opening remarks. I think you've set the scene very well for us there. Now we'll move on to the next section of the morning, and I will introduce our three cartelizans on my right here. On my far right, we have Vicissitudes Sanchez Granel, who is a member of ICLO-NLS. She is part of the youth committee and the coordinator of the In-Between group. She works mainly with children and adolescents and also works at Space to Be, a psychoanalytic institution oriented by plural practice. And then next to Mercedes, we have Miles Link. Miles is a member of ICLO-NLS, practicing in Dublin. He has taught literature in Ireland and Shanghai, and he is originally from Philadelphia. And beside me is Roz McCarthy. Roz is also a member of ICLO-NLS and API, and Roz is a psychoanalytic practitioner working in Kildare. So welcome. So by way of getting us started, my first thought was that I might do a short summary of Patricia Boscombe-Carroz's argument. And when I attempted to do the summary, I realized how how well written and how densely packed this piece is. So I will just highlight some points that she makes. She begins by, I suppose, taking the word painful and saying that for her, this word painful puts us on the side of excess, or on the crossing of unbearable limits, rather than on the side of malaise. And she divides the paper, her argument, into three sections. The first being the heading lack, disappointment, and sadness. She quotes Lacan from his seminar on transference, where he says that love emerges from the non-conjunction of desire and its object. And Boscan-Carraz notes that how this prefigures Lacan's later assertion that love makes up for the sexual non-relation. She highlights Socrates, which Lacan also does, Socrates' famous refusal to give the sign of love to Alcibiades. And I think she does focus on his refusal to give the sign as being what's important. She then quotes from the seminar La Logique du Fantasme, where she says that the rejected or foreclosed truth of the narcissistic fantasy, which could be articulated as, if you are not, I die, as anything which is foreclosed reappears in the real, to quote Lacan, through the most inconvenient and depressing effects. Patricia Boscan-Carraz makes an ethical connection in the Lacanian sense of that word, noting Lacan's comment in Television about the paradoxical task of saying well, of circumscribing in knowledge that which cannot be said. In the second section of the argument, entitled Love and Discourse, she notes that the promotion of unhappy reciprocal love appeared in the Middle Ages in the form of courtly love. Here, the man deals with the absence of the sexual relationship, to quote the paper, by idealizing the lady and valorizing her inaccessibility, while the amorous discourse feeds on lack, mourning, loss, and death. And in contrast, then, in terms of today's discourse of love, Boscan-Carraz notes Miller's comment on how the discourse of love, which had previously been understood in terms of lack, the lost object, and the unattainable ideal, has been replaced by a discourse that places the failure of love on the imaginary dominated axis. Boscan-Carraz remarks that while feminism has contributed to the legal equality of subjects, we are also witnessing, and I quote, a politicization of the intimate, and again, I quote, the war of the sexes is heating up, often for the worse. In the final third section, which is entitled A Matter of Structure, Boscan-Carraz notices how, in his last teaching, Lacan now situates the drama of love as two speaking bodies, quote, affected qua subjects of unconscious knowledge, as opposed to subjects of the want to be, manque à être. Miller states, in the light of there being no sexual relation, sexuated beings form a couple at the level of jouissance, which, of course, has implications for the subject in terms of masculine and feminine modes of sexuation. Boscan Cartels finishes by noting the ongoing implication of the signifier in the affect, and how, in analysis now, it is a question of isolating the traumatic mark and its impact on the misunderstanding between the sexes. The final sentence reads, "In our practice, when painful loves present themselves, we invite them to let themselves be caught in the net of signifiers in order to make jouissance enter into resonance with language." So these are just some highlighting some points from the argument. We have all independently read the paper, and we're here today to share our reactions and insights, our difficulties, and to try to function as a cartel as much as possible. So, who would like to begin? Miles? Okay, Miles.
This is okay. This is on. Okay, great. I really just have just a few kind of sketches of comments to share, because I'm kind of much more interested in kind of getting to the discussion part. But I was struck how already today with Alan's comments and with Alan's very penetrating comments, that we see that when we talk about love, we tend to talk about kind of interpersonal relations, kind of one-to-one kind of love. But of course, Patricia makes clear in this paper that love is also a kind of social force. And I'll just quote her directly. She says, "As we can see, love is not unrelated to the ideal conveyed by tradition." Okay. Ordering relations between the sexes, and I think this notion of ordering relations applies not only to, again, the way in which two people negotiate the non-relation, but also how that is set out as a kind of social blueprint or social map. And so she comments later in this paper on the kind of discourse, this kind of contemporary discourse. She calls it the battle of the sexes kind of discourse. And here, this is where I kind of didn't recognize so much what she was the direction in which she was going. You know, she speaks of kind of neo-feminism and victim ideology and this, but in this in raising this vocabulary, control, manipulation, domination, forcing, abuse, ghosting. The vocabulary, yes, but it's, for my own part, it is much easier for me to understand this sort of vocabulary of boundaries and gaslighting and all of these kind of words that people use now in terms of a kind of market vocabulary as a kind of, this is the kind of the love as a kind of commodity market. And when we were preparing for this, Tom mentioned a set of patients that would come to him and ask him, you know, what is this thing called love that people talk about? And that's exactly it. This is a kind of commodity fetishism in the classic sense of mistaking a social relation for a thing and then believing that the thing causes the social relation. This is the very definition that Marx lays out of commodity fetishism. So what's striking is not so much the discourse of a war between the sexes, but the discourse of the market that's at play here. For my sins, I have been reading lately Deleuze and Guattari, and I wouldn't pretend to understand about 5% of it, but I think they make a very useful application of Marx in talking about desire and talking about what the kind of cycles of desire that they speak of. Specifically, they use. I just want to even just kind of use this board here. Speak of the kind of capitalist cycle, or the cycle of capital that Marx talks about in Capital. So he says, from the perspective of the laborer, the cycle is, you have a commodity, in other words, your labor, you sell your labor for money, and in return, you get commodities back. The thing about this type of cycle is that it's very kind of one-to-one. There is, you get what you put into the cycle. But from the perspective of the capitalist, we have a different take on this cycle, right? The capitalist comes to the market, or comes to the process of production rather, puts in their money, gets a commodity back, for which they sell it on for more money, right? That's M prime, more money. So in other words, in the capitalist cycle, you get more money out than you put in. There is a kind of expansive, extractive, intensifying cycle here. What Deleuze and Guattari point out is that capital seems to go through different phases where the emphasis is first on money and capital, and then on capital and money prime, M prime, right? So in other words, capital builds up a bunch of commodities first, and then it unleashes this capital in the form of financialization, of kind of money set free from the necessity of being attached to specific products. I think we can see something of that in even in these kind of discourses on love that is based on let's say kind of the language of the market, in the sense that there is no longer a sense of love as something that one kind of risks something for, right? You kind of put your money down and you might get a return, you might not. Instead, there is this kind of idea of financialized love as a kind of rent-seeking love, where you own something or you are something, and you expect passive income on that ownership, on that thing that you are. I'm just kind of throwing out ideas, right? It's a kind of discourse of painless love, not painful love, right? It's disallowing the possibilities of love, the risk that you put in. You're not taking the risk, and you just expect something back. Is this? I mean, when Alan was speaking, I was thinking, is this kind of rent-seeking love? Is this another name for narcissistic love, right? For the expectation to be love, right? Is that what we're talking about in these kind of two phases of the production of desire? There's even, I mean, we could say that it's a painful love in the older sense of the word of painful, as in being careful, right? Taking pains. There's a pain that comes from risk, and there is a pain from being careful. So that's what I wanted to kind of say at the very beginning anyways. Okay.
Thank you very much, Miles. Yeah. We'll get we'll come back to this, no doubt. Yeah. So Roz or Mercedes, would you like to give your initial reaction?
Speak. Okay. Thanks, Alan and Tom, for the invite. What it did was it put me to work, which is what we were talking about. Up there. Okay. Painful loves we're talking about. Yes, but put me to work, and also, like Alan mentioned earlier, maybe was to find a trait with which to work with Patricia's argument for the NLS Congress. So I took as that trait a line in the argument, which is love as a matter of structure beyond discourse. And in Lacan's Écrits, of which there are many of his writings, he first of all he introduces into his 1958 paper's signification of the phallus, the notion of the conjunction and disjunction between love and desire. He says in that, it's not enough to be the subject of need or object of love. They must hold the place of the cause of desire. This truth lies at the heart of all the defects found in the psychoanalytic field regarding sexual life. I was interested in that. We see it, in the initial stages of the argument as well, when he's talking about Socrates and Alcibiades. And so the same year as the signification of the phallus was his paper on Gide, André Gide, French writer and winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 47. And in that text, as I said, same year as the signification of the phallus, was we see the breaking apart of the relationship of love and desire. So there's a divergence between love and desire in the parental couple, which has an effect. So looking at that in terms of initially the child and his objects, Miller, that's Jacques-Alain Miller, has also written, Lacan's text is a textual analysis of written by primarily Jean Delay, so it's not an in-person analysis. Jacques-Alain Miller picks up Lacan's work, and he asks many clinical papers in his question. The first being, in what respect does the parental relationship determine the subject's access to the other sex? Some of the theme that Alan was speaking to earlier. And what kind of access does it determine? In the mother-child relationship, there's the conjunction usually of love and desire. But for André Gide's mother, Juliette Gide, there's a malformation. There's a malformation between desire and love. She doesn't symbolize the object of her. Got it. She has difficulty with signifying the phallus as the object of her desire, and so there's a split between love and desire for her. She loves Gide, but it's from a position of duty. She loves him from a position of duty. The desire is not located anywhere, not in the relationship with her husband, and so the principle behind the phallic desire is that it allows for divergence. It allows for divergence between love and desire. But Lacan says it's a partial negation of symbolic castration is going on. It's not a complete denial of it. And what he says about that is that negativity has been deposited on the phallus, but in a way that is utterly distinct from that of castration. It is the jouissance of André's organ, not caught up in the paternal metaphor, which goes wandering off in a truly transgressive fashion, which accounts for the distinction between the negation and the denial of symbolic castration. Lacan asks, what was the mother to this child and this voice by which love was identified with the commandment of duty? The negative impact of desire precedes the elaboration of love. Madame Gide was a strict moralist. Her husband died when Andre was 11, and she continued to wear black and be in mourning for the rest of her life. She identified with the love of God, and so there was, in that sense, there was the commandment of duty. What Lacan does with that is that he develops a ternary of love, desire, and duty, and says one cannot that all three are not possible. That there's either love and desire, or there's love and duty. Miller picks that up and links it to Lacan's Valov alienation, which is in Seminar 11. And so he picks it up and develops it in terms of it's either or. It's either or, love or desire. And so he develops that the disjunction between love and desire, but not as a disjunction, but as a dissociation, which I understand them somewhat differently. So what he says, and it echoes Lacan, is that Andre was a loved child, but not a wanted child. The father's death, he says, took the capacity to humanize desire through speech. And he goes on to say that love dissociated, I thought this was quite interesting, was that love dissociated from desire had no erotic or sexual component. So with the abnegation, with the negation of pleasure, it's a mortified love. But desire for Andre appears someplace. So while we have a mortification of the phallus, there's desire, but it's within the realm of death. As a child, Gide, Andre suffered from what he called schaudern, shakes, which he linked to death grabbing hold of him. And with this identification with the mother of death, and his own encounter, as it were, with that, it began to set up for him the notion of the ideal woman. Okay, so the next point I wanted to make was the contingent encounters. The Lacan says that the respect with desire with respect to Gide, desire with respect to Gide is in the position of exclusion, but it insists, and he picks up the seduction by the aunt when Gide was 3. That was his mother's sister. No, it couldn't have been his mother's sister. It was she was the mother of the woman he subsequently married, Madeline. She was beautiful. He thought she was a beautiful, sensual Creole woman. But he says, but what Lacan says, in the seduction, by means of the imaginary, he becomes a desire child. He becomes what he missed out on. But this transformation comes only as a residue of symbolic subtraction, which occurred in the place where the child, faced with the mother, could only produce the self-abnegation of her jouissance. There was no jouissance, and the envelopment of her love. Desire left nothing here but the negative impact given form to an ideal of an angel that impure contact cannot touch. At the same moment, or at the same time of the encounter with the aunt, he also encountered Madeleine, who was 2 years older than him. One of the other important encounters for Gide was with the writings of Goethe, and he picked up this phrase in Goethe which says, "Thou mayest be what thou art," and in that he found a quilting point. The object of Gide's desire were the young boys, and particularly the young brown-skinned boys in Algiers. He spent quite a bit of time in Algiers. But there has to be a particular component, which was face-to-face mutual masturbation. And what Lacan says was that the absence of the signification of the phallus, that what sustained the desire was the imaginary relation that in that face-to-face moment. And I thought it was interesting that Lacan says that the masturbatory experience was an oceanic one, and that it placed him on the feminine side, identifying himself with the desiring woman. Eric Laurent, that is, suggests that neither understanding the structure of the subject nor that of the symptom leads us to the core of what perverse eroticism is. Rather, he says, it is best approached through the use of the phantasm. The unconscious fantasy is an image set to work in the signifying structure by which the subject maintains himself. And I thought it was also interesting that in Lacan's analysis of textual analysis of Gide, he never refers to the structure in that paper, but he does in one of his later seminars, The Formation of the Unconscious, where he says, André Gide's perversion does not depend so much on the fact that he can only desire little boys. His perversion consists in this. It is that here he can only constitute himself by perpetually telling himself to being the one who can only assert himself in the place occupied by his cousin, which puts him in respect to her in this sort of fatal dependency, which makes him cry out, "You cannot possibly know what the love of a clerk is like. It is something like an embalmed love." And just maybe lastly, I want to pick up a line linked to that in the argument. It says, and I'm sure it's very familiar to us, "The ways of love are nowhere to be designated as being so easily traced." So what Lacan did was he generated, what Gide did, was he generated an ideal image of a woman that would be capable of sustaining a disembodied love, unmixed with the flesh, a love that brings about a dissociation between love and desire. Gide himself relates the relationship with Madeleine to that of Dante and Beatrice, who had never actualized their love, and it was an impossible love, and who Gide saw as, and who Dante did, I suppose, raised Beatrice to the level of an angelic woman. And that's what Gide did with Madeleine. She was his one and only woman, which he had constructed in an angelic form. In fact, and we see this quote later in Lacan as well, Lacan says, "In fact, Gide's feeling for his cousin was truly the height of love, If love means giving what one doesn't have, and if he gave her immorality. How do we understand that for the couple? Gide gave Madeleine what he did not have, sexual desire, and desire was what Madeleine did not want. She wanted to remain pure in a non-consummate sexual union. This love had to be born at the point at which death had already overtaken the object. Lacan says that from this angelic place, that if she had been able to revive some sexual coloration, that it might have been a different relationship. What he says was her sole act in which she showed herself to be a woman was her burning of Gide's letters to her. Letters which were an embodiment of love. Gide, from the time he had met her, had written to her almost every single day. So it was thousands of letters over a period of decades. And at one stage, when she became aware of Andre's relationship with boys when he was in London, she burnt all the letters. And Lacan says this was the moment where she took up the position of the woman. The letters, Lacan says, in which he placed his soul had no carbon copy. I am suffering, Gide says, as if she killed her child. The writings had come to take the place of the sexual relation. The construction of a soul allows a being to bear what is intolerable in the world. This is Lacan, it's not an Aristotelian soul. Is the soul an effect of love, he asks, Lacan asks. In effect, as long as the soul so loves the soul, sex is not involved. Sex doesn't count here. The elaboration from which the soul results is homosexual. It's a play on man and sexual. But he says, women too are so loves that they so love the soul, being thus homosexual or beyond sex themselves. It being henceforth difficult for them not to sense the impasse that consists in the fact that they love each other as the same in the other, for indeed there's no need to be other. So, to conclude, until the eruption, what I wondered about was, until the eruption, the burning of the letters, the entire collection of whom she was the only addressee, Madeleine was the only addressee, was Andre and Madeleine's particular way of love, a loving of each other as the same. Andre's condition of love, the trait of the corpse, was rendered impossible by the act of burning the letters.
Thank you so much, Roz, for that. And we've no doubt you've raised many questions there. Mercedes, would you like to? Yeah. What is that?
Will that be okay? Yeah. Um, yeah. Well, as Tom was saying, the argument is very rich, and there's a lot of things, and I have little notes all over the text about I want to explore this, I want to read more about this. But there was something that really struck me, and it goes a little bit with what Miles was saying before. I will read what Patricia says when she talks about the problem of love. And she says, it's precisely from the non-conjunction of desire when its object that the meaning of love emerges and the end of a specific process, the metaphor of love. We can see here the premises of his later assertion, love makes up for the sexual non-relationship. the metaphor of love, it's a matter of contingency. When it occurs, the miracle of love is produced, and when it does not, disappointment or desolation is the result. I was thinking about this matter of contingency, and Alan was saying earlier on when he was talking about Freud, someone cannot decide who's going to love. And it made me think a bit how, Miles was mentioning how relationships, how are they spoken nowadays, and all these terms, ghosting, situationships, and there's not, love is not there in their definitions. And then the text, Patricia says, no, there's a consensual form of love that is being promoted based on a mutual recognition and governed essentially by the homoeotic principle of pleasure principle. So for me to understand this a little bit more, I went to literature. And I read a few years ago Sally Rooney's book, Normal People. And I remember that the relationship between the main characters, Connell and Marianne, it's a way of, for me, that, there's this thing promoted of this ideal of how the relationships should be. And then in the reality, you have, like an encounter. And so there were a few things, but this idea of complementary that is present. And when speaking of complementary, we find ourselves on a more imaginary plane, where we try to make those aspects that are discordant fit into each other. So both Connell and Marianne were forming other couples in the book that had complementary aspects. So Connell, he's in some part of the book, he has another girlfriend, because Marianne and Connell all the time, they have this enigmatic attraction, and they're together, but they're not together. And then at some point of the book, while Connell has a girlfriend that seems to go well with all this complementary aspect, and since she represents the ideal girlfriend, loved by all, accepted also by her mother. And then Marianne, she gets she's with another boy called Jamie, who also comes from the same social class and is accepted by the circle of university friends, and also fulfilling something of the imaginary ideal. But still there's something in Marianne that she feels she needs to reproduce some sort of submission she experienced in her experience with Connell, but she bring it to a literal level. So there's a few passages through the book, but Marianne takes this sadistic, masochistic game in a very literal level, but trying to reproduce something of the position, of that submission position that she feels, and that she wants to show that she show herself that she's capable of doing anything for the other to please him. I just found it like throughout the book there are a lot of things, but it shows really that even if they have the ideal boyfriend or girlfriend, there's something that is it's not that's still enigmatic for them, and that attraction is still enigmatic, and it's not as Patricia's saying, like there's something of the pleasure there that still escapes. I was interested about that, and looking a bit, when they introduced the concept of partner symptom, and then when it brings a bit the jouissance and the symptom, the other as a partner symptom, or I don't know. that takes something of the most intimate and enigmatic of the subject without enjoying it. So in this case, in the relationship between Marianne and Connell, it is based on the alterity, on the otherness, where it is possible to articulate something of the pulsionary jouissance of each. So the other appears as the repository of the more opaque jouissance that accommodates without judging it. So love is based on this premise, on finding in the other a different mirror that embodies something of the most ignored part of oneself. It's not a matter of thinking in the other, sort of a plug that constructs the fiction that in effect the drive has a perfect and ideal object as in complementarity. It's interesting because in the last chapter of the book, I don't want to spoil the book, I guess everybody read it. Sorry. There is a moment where Marianne corroborates that Connell has understood that it was not necessary to hurt her in order for her to submit to him. So this idea of doing everything for the other, since with his way of loving, she felt important and she belonged only to him. So Marianne's questions become whether Connell loves her, and that will happen if they separate. Will he miss her? So there's a possibility of a different relationship, through all the book. There's this enigmatic attraction that they cannot figure out, but they're not together, but they're together. And then towards the end, another question comes, which would allow, I don't know, because it's a bit of an open ending, another relationship. So that was a bit of the things that I, kind of highlighted from the text, and that really struck me. There's a lot to say, but for me it was helpful to go back to this couple, because in a way the description that Sally Rowan does of the two characters and their relationship is more in that encounter of love and that contingency of love, more than what now the discourses say about love, and then the relationship, the situationship, and ghosting. And as Alan said, what quoting Freud is that you cannot choose, or you cannot, what do you say? Decide, who you're gonna love. So that's me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mercedes. Just to say for the people joining us on Zoom that later we will open the discussion, but we would ask people on Zoom if they could type their questions or comments into the message, the chat function. Sorry, thank you. Again, I will try to live up to my task here of being the poor leader and allow you to react to each other's input so far. I know we only have 2 microphones, so we'll try to make this as conversational as possible.
I just want to respond to or say that what resonated with me about this question of love as a matter of contingency. I read a review of Sally Rooney's new book in the New Left Review. I'm being very leftist today, where the reviewer points out that she kind of tends to the formal constraints of the novel as an art form kind of tends to kind of push her towards these very kind of comedic endings in the kind of classic sense of comedy where everybody gets married off at the end, where like things have to find a certain kind of resolution, a satisfaction at the end of all of this drama. And I think what you've pointed out is that this kind of exploration of the partner as symptom is a lot more resonating or convincing or kind of for me anyways, as a reader, it's much more interesting than the way in which it ends, is the way in which it continues, or that it kind of manages to continue, because there is this question of how does one find oneself in love, but also kind of how does it manage to keep going? I think that's for me a kind of far more kind of pressing question for not just love, but a lot of matters today. How do things keep going the way they go, rather than how do they start? Because there's even a contingency, not just at the beginning, but all the way through. So in that sense, what's great about Sally Rooney is not only this kind of exploration of these things that are very kind of painful and uncertain the whole way through, but also that she does manage to make these kind of comedic endings still very satisfying in their way, right? It reminds me a lot of Eric Rohmer's films. I don't know if you've seen any of them, but Eric Rohmer in the 70s, 80s, 90s, these kind of French films where all of the characters kind of get married off at the end in various ways, and there's a sense of a kind of satisfaction there, but there's also this kind of winking, kind of like this is what you wanted, isn't it? I'm going to give you exactly what you want, and there's going to be a satisfaction in it, but there's also going to be a kind of ironic delivery of exactly what you were expecting. So that's what comes up. I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts to.
That I find that in this particular book she doesn't give the reader what they are expecting, because it just finished up. I remember when I read it the first time, I was like, oh, they're not together, what's gonna happen? And then reading it from a different perspective, it was just what needed to happen for them to reunite, maybe in another way. But yeah, it's interesting, and there are a lot of passages throughout the book where they share their thoughts, and they're questioning, and you can see the enigmatic side of it, of not understanding what's between them, and like that, because it just resonates with the text and this matter of contingency, and there's a lot of pain as well, not understanding what's going on between them. But yeah, it's very interesting. I don't fully understand the concept of partner syndrome, but going to this book and these characters helped me maybe grasp some things. So yeah, I think she done a very good description. I don't know about her new book. I know that there was the idea of that maybe she was going to do she called it Normal People. Well, there's nothing normal about it, but if there was going to be a second part, but I don't know what happened with that. But it's I like the open ending in that side, and it's it allows for Marianne this thing of this submission to the other, this question that I think Alan said no, but in the women side, that does he love me? So that goes in, that question changes and allows another relationship. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if she gives to the reader what the reader is expecting, but it's good. It's interesting. It keeps the enigma through the book between them. So I find that very attractive, to read, because it doesn't satisfy you fully. So good.
Can I ask a question which is actually addressed to you both? And I was thinking of it in particular to young loves. I was struck by what you said, Miles, about the capital builds up a bunch of commodities first. And if we're talking about the commodity of love, what happens with the marketplace, as it were, when it has become flooded. And I was juxtaposing that with in amongst young people and the question of whose body are they enjoying? Are they enjoying the other's body, or is it their own body that they're enjoying? And is some of the flooding of the market, as it were, something to do with that as well?
Again, just to kind of extend the metaphor of the market of, you know, whatever, when the market is saturated, right, that's when we get phenomena of financialization, of speculation. And so of course there's always an element of financialization of kind of investing or you know, speculating in that sense, but in order for something to have room to move, there is a dependence on something that is fictional, not in the sense of being fake, but in the sense of being invented to kind of be utilized at a speculative later date. So maybe, I don't know, I'm just kind of picking up on this idea, right, of, you know, maybe it's not that there is an unwillingness to risk or an unwillingness to kind of put oneself in a position where one could get hurt, but maybe there is a speculation on enjoyment. It's really just an idea. It's you know, I couldn't take it any further than that, but.
Yeah, we will come to, we have questions coming here in the room and also on Zoom. Just want to check with you, have any of you any more to say at this moment, or see this? Yeah,
I would say something because you talked about the market, and then what Alan was saying, just the word he used for Freud is love is an achievement. It's really like, no, on that terms, like, no, it sounds a bit like that needs to be cultivated. So I was a bit, yeah, I don't know, struck with that word. And then what you spoke about the market and this idea of the yeah, of the, you said something about the not risk of love, but of investing, you know. Yeah, it was just a comment, but it just yeah.
yeah. I was interested when you raised this, Sally Rooney's book as well, and the market. My memory of the book as well is that she locates it in quite a circular market structure. That am I correct, or do I remember that his mother was working for her mother? Yes, so money was circulating in this relationship, literally, and it not quite, but it reminds me of Lacan's letter in how he looked at the purloined letter, that money was going from let me think, her mother to his mother, which was then going to him to enjoy college, to enjoy the relationship with the other, and the money was, anyway, her labor was going back into the family. So it's just an interesting other angle on this, I guess. That these two people, while the book is about love, that she certainly locates it in a social and economic structure. So I know people are anxious to break into this cartel, so we'll allow them to do that. Cecilia.
Thank you, and thanks for everybody. This is really interesting. I have a question with what you said there, Rose and Ross. I just want to know if I understood what you asked with regard to young loves. Did you ask if they enjoy the body of the other or their own body. Is that what you asked?
Sorry. Thank you. Is there a delusion, as it were, that it's the body of the other we enjoy?
But that relates to all, not to young
Absolutely,
love. Yeah?
absolutely. But is it, when in adolescence, when it begins to move from something that's autoerotic to what's erotic, is there an eruption, as it were, at that stage when there's a I don't know whether there's a realization or not, but when there's something that is deluded in the sense of that we think it's the other body we enjoy.
Break.
Apologies, too quick off the mark. Just a quick comment because I think that is, I think Lacan refers to that problem or that issue, the two bodies meeting in terms of jouissance. I think he refers to it as the jouissance of the edge. I think that's his solution. Because for Lacan, that was in the 1970s, the latter part of his work, an enormous question. So because two bodies meet, and that is in a kind of a mystery.
Sure.
So he talks about the jouissance of the edge, I think.
Of the edge?
The edge.
I'd like to make a brief comment to that, because I think the presentation of the argument shows that it's impossible to speak about love and about pain without plunging into the knotting between desire, jouissance, and love. And this is the whole problem that Freud and Lacan tried to approach in different ways. And with regards to Cecilia's and Rick's questions, well, the points that they were interested in, of course, the problem of desire, love, and jouissance changes in Lacan's teaching according to the status of the body and what the body becomes, which is the body and also the other, the big other. And I think we're all very enthusiastic with what everyone presented today, because it gives us ways of entering into these difficulties, especially, I would say, with regards to Lacan's clear statement that it's only the body that enjoys itself, that we never have access to the body of the other in terms of enjoyment or jouissance. But what I found very interesting in what Ross presented there was the unusual way of understanding masturbation and masturbatory jouissance indeed, which is not necessarily on the side of the one, and the jouissance of the idiot, yes, the pure iteration. So that's for me already a gain in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Florencia. Alan, yeah.
Yeah, really enjoyable cartel in action. And I'd just like to maybe pick up on one thing, there are many things one could, but, the commodification that you mentioned, Miles, because it really is a feature of our contemporary world, commodification of everything. You could say that the tyranny of today is a tyranny of self-optimization. And that has, let's say, come into the love relation. If this relation is not optimizing me and you in some way, then the subjects move on. And we could say, you know, it's very evident that today, let's say, love is in trouble. Less people are getting married. There's a significant drop in marriage rates in Western cultures. First marriages, I'll throw in a few statistics. First marriages, I think in the US it's about 48% divorce rate. And then Freud had this peculiar idea that for a man, the second woman he loves, it's often more successful because the shadow of the Oedipus is less. But in fact, it's not true, because second marriages, the divorce rate's about 68%. And third marriages, it's 80%. Yeah. These are statistics from the US. So yeah, love is in trouble. And not only that, lots of people, marriage is in trouble. Good point. Not only that, a lot of people are living alone. More and more people live alone. They may or may not have so-called lat relationships, living apart together relationships, but they live alone. And I suppose what we're talking about is the changes in the contemporary discourse of love. And I'd just like to give a short clinical example. I met a patient yesterday, and she had just started a relationship with a man who she really likes, except his girlfriend was on holiday. So they seem to be getting along well. They're 2 weeks to hanging out together, but the girlfriend is coming back, and she's open to non-monogamy. So she's quite comfortable with the idea of non-monogamy. But here's her problem. She can only accept the open relationship, say, on the basis of it being non-hierarchical. So she's not prepared for this man to have a primary partner and her to be the secondary partner. And that's going to be very difficult to negotiate. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you. I think Eva was first, and then we come to you.
Thank you so much. I just can you hear me? I just wanted to say two things to what struck me in the argument of Péché Buscancarus, that she uses painful love in modern French. Amour is masculine, but you can use it in plural and feminine, and that rhymes with douloureuse. So amour douloureuse and amoureuse. So there's kind of this pain in it. And it's interesting that in English you say painful, so it's nearly like an oxymoron, it's full of pain. So I think there's something with kind of the excess and the lack that's very important. And to just say one thing to the achievement, in Freud's term, if I remember correctly, it's Errungenschaft, which entails ringen, so the wrestling, which is again a question of balance and of not knowing. So that's just what I want to say.
Thank you all. Thank you all for a very interesting flash cartel. There's a lot of salient points. I'm going to try to pick out a quick thread. It would be interesting to look at this from the perspective of clinical practice, which Alan mentioned a couple of examples, but we haven't drawn any extractions as to how this emerges from clinical practice. So I'll start and draw a brief thread, mostly from what Alan was saying in his initial paper. What we have in the Freudian thing is an intra-image transfer of libido. It's at the level of the ego. In Lacan, we have the exposure of the non-relation. And it's very, very interesting to see how all the cultural examples are built on the back of the non-relation. Essentially, culture, we can think of it as a treatment of the non-relation. But with respect to jouissance, I quote Pierre-Gilles Guégan from a paper we translated on Psyche and Eros many years ago now, but it's in Lacanian, very good paper. His jouissance is as ineluctably his as hers is hers. That's the non-relation. It's not transferable. We have an intra-image transfer of libido, but we have no transfer of jouissance. We come to enumeration, love and hate. And we should speak about transference and how through identifications, this is what emerges in the side of the pro-transference, where everything is wonderful, the analyst is the best, and how the other side of that can emerge in what is broadly called negative transference. And this is to be negotiated in clinical practice. Now, there was a good question emerged, and Cole Porter wrote about it in 1929. What is this thing called love? This funny thing called love, just who can solve its mystery and why it should make a fool of me, is the chorus. And what Lacan says are the non-dupes err. So we become dupes of the unconscious in the transference to negotiate the passage of an analysis. And what do we find towards its end? The non-relation and the sorrow of that for all the transference that has been and gone. So I think that's for me, the clinical relevance of some of what you were saying, Alan, and of course, the very interesting points made, particularly by Mercedes. And one of the things about Sally Rooney's work is that we get mystified in the enigma of the love relation, but one serious thread in that work is the becoming of a writer. And this is a writer writing about painful love and the becoming or the birth of writing in one sense of the thread of the book. So look, that's my comment, and I hope there's a question in there somewhere too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raphael. Yeah. Miles, yeah.
Just what that evokes in me is, and Alan's comment about the tyranny of optimization, is that perhaps this is where love can come to the rescue in some sense. I mean, from the argument, Patricia says very clearly, love does not think. It ignores the narcissistic fantasy from which it draws its support. And there's a kind of tragedy in that. But there's also, great things can happen when you set aside certain imperatives or certain, certain constraints under which you live, and think freely. So maybe that also comes in clinically as well. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Miles. Yeah, we have two questions from our Zoom participants, I think. Yeah, Florencia is going to.
So I'm going to try to follow the thread from the chat, thanking everyone who is present on Zoom, far away, some on a very different time zone. And while at the same time trying to add a pin here. Okay, so Ganesh asks the following. I'm going to read them as they are, and then people, perhaps the cartel can decide what to take on, and then the audience here as well. So Ganesh says, Alan Rowan's very thought-provoking constructions based on what Freud said about love, particularly his concluding remark where he said the question in loving for Freud is not, do I love the other or does the other love me, but rather, one of, am I lovable to the other, or do I desire to be lovable to the other, set me thinking. Could it be construed that Freud is alluding to or heading towards the non-existence of the sexual rapport? The second intervention we have, it's by Alexandra. She says, but it's interesting in these ultra-capitalist times, love is loved more than ever in a way as something specially necessary, perhaps given the capitalist discourse. So it's a remark that also can be a question. Vanya says, does love make a nothing for a couple on the level of the conjunctions of formulas of fundamental fantasy, or at the level of a conjunction of the singular jouissances of the respective symptoms? That is a very good and very difficult question. And then she says, on the question of painful loves, isn't it that love always opens wounds that continue to bleed? And then Alexandra Murkov says, thank you for introducing at the very beginning about the structure and work of cartels. That's coming back to the modality of work, which is also a question about love in the community, in how analysts group it themselves. The signifier hierarchy, says Alexandra, she says the cartel should be non-hierarchical. And now my questions. Are you referring to possible power relations between the egos of the cartel? 2, are there or not hierarchical relations in between S1, S2, etc., in the subject of the unconscious, structured like a language of the cartel? So perhaps it is implicit in the question that where is the subject of the unconscious placed in the cartel? And then there is another, there are a few more, but I think that's enough for the cartel at the moment, and I'll go back to the 2 further remarks later.
Thank you very much, Florencia. Anybody? We have various questions or comments arising there, and maybe we'll hold the one about the cartel for the moment, and stay with the argument, and we can come back to the cartel one at the end. The first question there, I think, from Ganesh on Freud's "Am I lovable?" Was there a prefiguration here of the sexual non-rapport, if I understood the question correctly? Anybody like to respond to that, or it's an interesting thought?
I think that's a nice observation, Ganesh, because I think Rowan did come very close to the idea of the non-sexual rapport, but he never quite managed to put it in that way, but he was close. For him, there was a problematic coming together in the love relationship. So there's something of that. Of course, the other thing that it makes me think of is we have to recognize that love is discourse. It's how we talk about this thing called love that counts in human life. And once that's actually something Patricia says in her paper, Love is Discourse. It's not all of the story, but it's a big part of the story. And what we have to recognize is that in different historical periods, the discourses on love were very different. Like the ancient Greek idea that love was about finding one's other half. Love was about achieving a kind of wholeness. In fact, the only way of achieving a kind of wholeness. Then you have courtly love. Courtly love is entirely different. It's a love outside, because sometimes these knights, for example, who declare their love for the lady, were in relationships, they were married, they were getting on with their life. But then they had this idea of the ideal love was to love the woman who was unavailable. Strange idea, but it was there for several hundred years. And it's only in the 18th century that we get the idea of romantic love. The idea that you can find a partner, and in that partner there will be some unnameable or hard to describe special thing that makes you happy. And also, I'm probably going on a bit, but like, we also have to recognize cultural differences. So not just historical differences, but traditionally, for example, in some countries, India comes to mind. It's a country which is changing a lot, but traditionally, love really in the romantic sense had no place in forming relationships. And in fact, would have been seen, I think, my understanding anyway, is as problematic, frowned upon, because the relationship was to be established between two families. And a bit like in older times in Europe, there was a lot of emphasis on this exchange between two families and making another family. I mean, there would, to my knowledge, there's the idea that something like love could grow in that context, but it's very different to the idea of romantic love that we have from Goethe.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, and indeed, in Ireland, those of us who had to read Peg Sayers in school would also have seen that marriage was often based on arrangements between families. Yeah. Now, I was trying to scribble notes here. Vanya's question certainly struck a chord here in the room, but I'm not sure if I'm formulating it correctly. Love, she asked if love was a knotting for couples based on the fundamental fantasy.
Well, if the conjunction was at the level of the fundamental fantasies, separate in the two, or at the level of the singular jouissance involved in their respective symptoms.
Indeed. Anybody like to take that? Or is that a question that we have to arrive at rather than answering? Rick? Yeah, it's okay, yeah.
Don't know whether it's an answer. I don't know whether this is an answer at all, but in L'étude, Lacan says, again, there is no such thing as a sexual rapport, a sexual relation. But I was not saying, he says, that there is no relation to sex. And sex, I think, is an equivocation in the sense of sex, having sex, the jouissance of sex, and sex of the man, the woman, the two sides of the couple. So in other words, there is no sexual relation, but it doesn't mean that there is no relation. There is, now I'm not just sure how to read this, but the way I'm reading it, again, I don't know whether that's correct, is that that what binds them, and again, perhaps that is that edge, together is phallic jouissance. And because both relate to and experience phallic jouissance, and it's the other jouissance, let's say the feminine jouissance, that sprouts out of that, which creates the non-relation, as it were. But again, I don't know whether.
Maybe, yes, to add to that, a reference that I particularly want to explore in the work towards the Congress. So it's a reference that Lacan makes to love in his later teaching, and to love understood in the context of his formulae of sexuation. In other words, according to how you understand what Rick was saying now, you'll have different versions of modalities of love. And he points out this has nothing to do, of course, with gender as it's understood culturally, but even though the real of the body is there, and we always struggle because we try to clarify this has nothing to do with male and female in the biological sense, but at some point, it's my experience anyway, in listening and in reading, that becomes a stumble block. But in any case, Lacan says the masculine way of love is encounters the limit of the fetish. And the feminine way of love encounters the limitlessness of erotomania. To talk about styles of loving.
Okay, yeah. So many things to try.
There are some more questions as well for
Yeah.
when
Okay.
it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Different things to try to pick up. And again, Raphael was quoting Cole Porter and the thing called love, which Miles referred to. I made a comment that I'd been asked more than once about this thing called love. Primarily working with clients who are autistic or neurodivergent, who often seek, certainly many of the clients I would deal with who seek definitions and answers online, but who perhaps then encounter it as are more likely to perhaps encounter it as a commodity than as some kind of interpersonal event. Yeah. Yeah, we have more questions. Perhaps I'm losing some questions here. Alexandra, sorry, that was the question about the cartels that we said we would hold on to. Maybe we'll take some. Or sorry, did you wish to speak? No. Maybe we'll take some more there, Florencia. Yeah. Yes, and Alan.
Okay. I mean, just because you're talking about the clinic, and Raphael, you brought it up, it is important. Maybe it's a bit beyond us today, but when Patricia in her paper talks about structure and love, discourse, structure, love, we can think of structure in various ways, obviously feminine on the feminine or masculine side, but also in terms of our categories, our psychoanalytic categories. And the main division that counts clinically is between psychosis and neurosis, although as soon as one says that, one has to emphasize one works with the singularity of each subject. But having said that, you know, on the neurotic side, clinically, we're familiar with things like obsessionals who drive their partners mad because they turn everything their partner says into a demand. It's a common love problem if one has an obsessional structure. But then on the side of psychosis, the subjects on the side of psychosis, say ordinary psychosis rather than florid psychosis, tend to have particular difficulties in forming love relations. It is possible. But for example, and just to like be illustrative, the problem is obviously in paranoia, that the partner can become persecutory. And how to have a partner for somebody with a paranoid structure who does not become persecutory is a clinical problem.
I'll read some of the questions. Going back to what Alan was saying in relation to India, Ganesh has two remarks. One was tyranny of self-optimization, very true in India too. I was speaking to a man in the business of selling sex toys who said the market for it growing exponentially in the last decade. I believe that I can augment my enjoyment by paying for it. And then he also says, it's true, Alan, that even today in parts of India, romantic love is problematized. And he thanks you for your response. There are two more questions. One, it's a comment from Alexandra about Lacan saying that analysis can offer a way out of capitalism through subversion. Can love be a way, including in the failure that keeps breaking through the attempts of the discourse to control it, making it subject to laws of the market? And she adds, the aspect of subversion of love as a possible way out of capitalism connected to what Lacan says in the argument that is quoted. There is also love as a knot from Alexandra, again discussing that notion in 1974. And then there is a comment from Nikos stating a clarification about the expression there is no sexual relation, which obviously in English we always have different problems. And he says, this does not mean that there is no sexual relationship. It's relation in the mathematical sense of the term. The French word is rapport. That it cannot be, the sexual relation cannot be reported linguistically or through meaning. It's basically the impossibility of its writing. To go back to the very interesting aspect of writing and what Mercedes brought.
Thank you, Florencia. Yeah. So again, I'd ask anybody, at this stage, anybody in the room, let's take Alexandra's comment or question about can love be a subversion of love, or can love be a way of, did she say subverting or escape? Did she say subverting or subversion?
Yes, I think it's when Lacan refers to capitalism, of course, is not a discourse. He says it's a pseudo discourse. It's not a discourse because it doesn't include an impossible. And the very notion of discourse in Lacan is a social bond based on an impossibility. Capitalism as a pseudo discourse, says Lacan in the 70s, forecloses all things connected or linked to love. And that's his, if I understand correctly. If not, they can make it known in the chat.
Yes. Yeah. I suppose within capitalism, there is the tendency to commodify anything anyway. Yeah. Love included. Thereby attempting to attach that kind of meaning to the signifier rather than it being or to nail it down as some kind of fantasy, sell it, yeah, or that one can optimize oneself through various through investing one's time or money in various activities.
Just to add very quickly, I like that idea of thinking of love versus capitalism, because just make a remark, like it's a satisfaction that is outside capitalist commodification. And a simple example would be, I would much prefer to take a stroll with you than go shopping.
Okay. So just to ask anybody here in the room who hasn't contributed already, if you'd like to ask any questions or make any observations. We do, yes, sure, yeah. Raphael?
Thanks, Tom. Just in relation, Alan, to your point, it brings to mind the direction of a treatment of a patient many years ago, where it was a schizophrenic presentation, but there had been a break, or there was a foreclosure. But his experience of his body was relying to schizophrenia, and a love relation that he formed gave him a different access to his own jouissance that he hadn't had before. It was very successful for him in restoring his ability to work and to love and to be with family and so on, as opposed to just his experience of the return of jouissance would cause isolation. So it was very important. It wasn't easy, but it was an important part of that treatment.
Thank you, Raphael. Yeah, we did have a question which I postponed. It was from Alexandria. Perhaps, Alan, I might ask you to comment on it concerning the signifier hierarchy in terms of cartels. Yeah. Can you remember the question, or will we ask for it? Do we still have it at all? Perhaps
Which
not.
question? Sorry.
It was from, I think.
Oh, yes,
Alexandra
yes. I'll go back.
on cartels.
It is from Alexandra Mirkov about the signifier hierarchy. The cartel should be non-hierarchical. Are you referring to possible power relations between the egos of the cartel? Are there or not hierarchical relations between S1, S2 in the subject of the unconscious of the cartel?
Okay, it's kind of
Ross?
Ross, do you want that? Okay, I mean, there's complexity in the question, but what I would stress is that having a psychoanalytic institution that is non-hierarchical is absolutely essential to the ongoing development of psychoanalysis. So, and the freedom that one needs, because, culture changes, the world changes, and psychoanalysis needs to keep up and respond to what it finds in the world and in the clinic. So it's not just that the importance of non-hierarchical relations in terms of the cartel, the transference to work. It's also a principle of the Lacanian orientation that, for example, there's rotation in all positions. If you're a director or head of the WOP or in any sort of position, it's temporary. Whereas in other organizations, these hierarchies can get very stuck. They go on, and that's very deadening.
Rick, yeah. Oh, sorry, yeah. Will I take it first, then Rick, and then,
yeah? Just responding to that question and what Alan was saying, I think that that term that you used, which I think is Millar's, of the poor leader, is very important. +1 as a poor leader, because I was thinking about it. What it actually says is that the +1 does not contain knowledge and doesn't operate in that way. So that in actual fact, you're always confronted with not knowing, hole in knowledge, this kind of thing. So that everyone's relationship to this is singular, but non-hierarchical. And so I think it centers around that. I never heard that expression, actually, poor leader, for the +1. I think that's really good. It's great. Yeah.
Indeed, I do think that when Beyond was running groups without leaders, that the chaos and that had to be tolerated, and well, I guess he was working particularly, I think, with the military, who were used to very strict hierarchies, yeah. So I mean, it's also a challenge to be in a group without a hierarchy, or to sustain a group without a hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean, similar type comment. I think it's the non-hierarchical nature that which creates the hole in the cartel, that allows for the transference to work. Otherwise, I think the transference is to the hierarchy.
Not about this, but I was thinking, Rafael brought the transference and what you just mentioned it, but when I was reading for this, well, I read a lot about love in transference, and there is, I don't know where is it, but I was reading a text that mentions that Freud says that the subject that is in love is a lazy subject. I don't know where is that, but I found it like funny but true, because he says in the like in the transference, if there's more love and love to knowledge, there's less association. Because you mentioned the love and the hate there, and how to maneuver that in an analysis. It's not that it was a question that raised, and I find it very interesting to think the subject that is in love as lazy, and not wanting to know. So yeah, no, it's just a comment.
Thanks, Mercedes. I mentioned sorrow and the end, but if there's love at the end of an analysis, it's love of one's own unconscious. In the capacity of the singularity of what is one for each one. It's a series of ones. It's not 1 + 1 is 2. Having that said, of course, we can make arrangements and partnerships and have love and sex and do all these wonderful things that can become too entirely painful at times, because when love comes in the window, it's a mystery, and it goes out the window, and it's a mystery. This is we can be very didactic sometimes in our explanation of these things psychoanalytically, and it's not to try to take from it, but it's to try to be clinically relevant. And then we leave to filmmakers and good writers and poets to give us the stuff of love and culture, which, as Alan said, is something, or it's a point that a couple of people made, that there's something of that resists capitalism. I don't know, does it subvert it at this stage? I'm not sure, because we see the Instagram stories, and it's very interesting. You know, you go to a bar or a restaurant, you see a couple on a date, and what they're doing is producing an Instagram story. So the whole thing is being documented and posted as they go, which is it's a phenomena for sure.
There is a nice comment remark on the chat from Ganesh saying the flash cartel at work was a demonstration of each person in the cartel being alone in the pursuit of their trade and yet not isolated. Which perhaps is also a question I was wondering as I was listening to each, you know, if at the end of this morning there would be a trait that could be made explicit for each cartelisand and +1.
Thank you, Florencia. Sheila.
Thanks, Tom. And I'd like to thank you all for your presentations this morning. They were wonderful. I've just a comment really, and I suppose it's from listening to the discussion just now. And I was wondering, you know, in terms of love relations and the question of consent, and it was really in reference to Sally Rooney's book as well. Just, I didn't read the book, but I saw the film, and I thought the whole question of consent in it was so verbalized, you know, that it's, you know, and advertised on TV today. You know, if someone doesn't say no, or someone's got to say no to mean no. I don't know if you have any comments about it, but it's just something that was a thought that was raised for me as I was listening to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Sheila. Would anyone like to take that or respond, or does that evoke any response in anybody?
I was thinking of Clotilde Leguil's book, Toxic Love. And indeed her work with us here about consent. And what of the impossibility of consent is present in toxic love?
Thank you. Perhaps just to come back to Florencia's question or suggestion there for the, particularly our 3 cartelisans, yeah. Is there in your experience of working this paper and of being here this morning, a trait that could be made explicit or for you? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Reluctance.
Go. Okay. A number of things at a number of different levels. One is somewhat akin to a cartel in real life is not knowing what the singular ones will bring and what is one's response. And my own experience of cartels is there's something of that whole in knowledge which is anxiety provoking. My response is usually to put a paper together. So I think there's something of that. But I was also struck about the theme of writing in that Sally Rooney's writing in itself, what was that of her, in the same way that André Gide's writing was something of a response to the non-rapport, the non-sexual rapport. So I just wondered about that. And of course, Gide was when he met Madeleine, a young man. And so I wondered about the place of bodies in that as well. So I wondered if there was some sort of theme in that.
I don't know if this directly kind of answers that this question of trait. And I was originally thinking of it in terms of how Alan posed it with kind of love versus capitalism. The Chinese word for hobby or a kind of personal interest is I hall. I is the word for love. So it's a kind of, in that word hobby, we can hear the word love, at least in the Chinese context. Hobby is a very interesting thing in that it's a, let's say, an investment of libido energy that has a limit. It's not unbounded, infinitely expandable. If it takes over your life, it's no longer a hobby. So it recognizes that impossibility, even in the pursuit of a kind of replenishing pleasure. That's something is kind of, it's discouraged to have hobbies these days. You have to be kind of hustling. If you're not monetizing your hobby, then you are wasting your time. You know, you are wasting your love.
Hey there, sorry. No, just when you were saying that, it made me think there's a show on the BBC called The Repair Shop. And I don't know if anyone's ever watched it, but basically it's all these different kind of craftspeople, people like clock workers or cobblers, whatever. And people bring in old objects with sentimental meaning to them, and these people repair them. And you kind of, they talk about the act of repair, and then at the end they show the repaired object, and there's an emotional reaction like, oh, this is my grandfather's thing and all this. But when I was watching it, I was thinking about how they show all the work involved and all the painstaking work, but there is an enjoyment there. It's non-alienated labor, because they know that all the work they're doing is really meaningful to somebody and will make someone really happy. And there is a story and all this. Whereas in most of our lives, the work we do doesn't mean anything to us unless we're really lucky. So we spend most of our time doing things that don't mean anything to anybody, even to ourselves. So then love has to try and compensate for that, maybe, in our time outside of work. So that's just, yeah.
Yeah. Mercedes, or would you like to?
What was the question again?
Is there a trait emerging for you, if you
Ah,
like, in terms of your experience in this cartel?
Yeah, the lack, and yeah, I guess like it opened a lot of questions, but was more in the in Lacan's aphorism, well, non-sexual relationship, but then sorry, it comes in Spanish. Love is giving what you don't have. So that were things that kind of oriented a bit my my questions, and then the contingency in love and how that's thought nowadays in relationships. And Alan was saying that there's love is in trouble, but I'm thinking about the marriage and all that. But well, I don't know if marriage is synonym of love, but yeah, love is in trouble. I'm thinking also not only in relationships, but all the wars and all the hate. That is a common word in social media as well, the hate. So yeah, a bit of open up questions. I wouldn't have like a very defined trait, but going there.
Yeah, maybe just to pick up on the commentary, and it's always interesting, the effect of going back to things that we believe we know, things that we think we understand in Freud, in Lacan. I was quite shocked by the relevance of some of the things that Alan was quoting from Freud from the 20s. And then this particular aphorism of Lacan, love is to give what one does not have. It has the power of being quite enigmatic, becoming enigmatic every time. It's as if one of those things that you think you have it in your hand, but you don't have it. And in relation to your comment, which I appreciated, is precisely the question of time and the experience of time in contemporary culture, in the clinic, the experience of time as we live it today, and how you introduced a very important word for psychoanalysis, which is luck. Because when one is lucky enough, is also an aphorism that we could put to work, not only in our work, and how we choose our work, but also luck is in its Lacanian, the way Lacan took it, is also what was spoken about today: contingency and encounter. It's encounter.
Thank you, Florencia. I sense we're coming to something of a close, yeah. Again, very open if anybody wants to ask any questions. You know, the idea again of today was to do something of a cartel, and I'd like to thank our three cartelizans for doing something where normally it might be done without an audience, and of asking questions or of giving a personal response to something, but of thereby hopefully it's not about illustrating how a cartel works, but of saying this is how today at this moment we conduct this cartel, and again, it's not that we're launching cartels today. We're not selling cartels, but we are inviting. There is an invitation and indeed an encouragement to anybody participating today, whether you are attend ICLO events regularly or whether you're very new to the whole thing. Cartels. Well, the cartels are the lungs of the school. They're really, really important. So if you want to become seriously involved, becoming involved in a cartel, forming a cartel, is a really good way of going about it. Again, Alan and I are responsible for cartels in ICLO this year. We will be available in the room here if after we finish, or indeed for our online friends, if you want to contact us by email, please do, and we'll try to facilitate you. The email address is cartels, cartels at ICLO NLS.org. Yeah, maybe I'll try that again. Okay, so it's cartels at ICLO-NLS.org. Yeah. Okay. Not seeing any hands up. So thank you all very much for coming this morning. Okay, thank you.
Okay.